So, Hannah, you know Overwatch. One of my favorite healers to play is Mercy. Do you know why Mercy always has the blonde hair that she was born with?
Why?
Because heroes never die.
Let's move away from lies and fears. Perhaps it's time to leave. Free from how you look or what they say. Like a lion runs wild through the wilderness. Free from showing off a living fate. Like the eagles flying high, dancing with the air. There's breath in your lungs to breathe. Say, God, take this mask away. You see, he won't let you stay. Living in hollow days.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of ShatterCast. Today we're going to be talking about BlizzCon 2019.
Blizzcon.
A lot of stuff to unpack. We got Diablo 4 announcement, Overwatch 2 announcement, World of Warcraft's new expansion, Shadowlands, a whole slew of other things. An update during the opening ceremony about J. Allen Brack talking about the response that Blizzard had to Blitzcon and his feelings on that. So that's actually what I wanted to open with first, even though it wasn't the first thing in our sort of our outline of this segment, because we did talk a lot about that, about the Blizzard and Hong Kong and China issue a lot in a previous segment, and just kind of wanted to get our thoughts on what J. Allen Brack said. So I think you have maybe some specific things you've written down or any thoughts that you have about what he shared.
Sure. There's some people in the community who feel like it wasn't a big enough apology. They're sticking to their revised, punishment or whatever, Blitzchung and some of the others. And they still had some protests and things like that. So there's concerns about what Blizzard's going to do going forward. Just my perspective is I'm glad he apologized. Anyone who stands up and says, hey, you know what, we went too far, I think is good. Is that far enough? Maybe not. We'll see what they'll do in the future. I think it's a good start. And so I will at least applaud them for acknowledging the elephant in the room and at least starting the conference off with that. I feel like if they kind of buried the lead and we're like doing all this announcements and stuff, then I think some of the announcements that they did make, which were pretty big, I know me as a person who was watching the opening ceremony, I would be like not interested in it. So I think it was a good move on his part. Hopefully it was heartfelt. Seemed heartfelt, but we'll see what happens. Again, we'll see how the community responds and how Blizzard responds going forward.
Yeah. What about you, Hannah?
I think I agree with Derek. I'm not sure if the opening ceremony was probably the best place to put it. I don't know how many people actually watch the opening ceremony because they're there for like the big announcements. But again, I think it's time to like move forward. But I'm glad that they moved forward without like just pretending it didn't happen or glossing over it. They actually did address it in front of all those people, both in person and online.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a good point. As a company, you have a decision you're going to make, right? All of this publicity that's been relatively bad, right? Some people view any publicity as good publicity because at least our name's out there. But this was arguably bad publicity for Blizzard. And they had an opportunity to either do what they did, which was apologize, which I do commend them for. Actually willing to have the guy in charge of the whole thing stand up there in front of the crowd and look at the camera and say, we didn't live up to the standard that we give ourselves, which I appreciate. Like Derek said, I think it's a good start, but I really want to see how they're going to act moving forward. We got a taste of that in that there were people protesting inside and outside the convention, even some things that were said on camera, and all the Blizzard employees were basically like, yeah, you know, like,
what can I say? So
exactly. They just like, they didn't, they kind of just let it happen. You know, it kind of is a way to make up for it, I think. Does it make it okay? No. Do I appreciate the apology? Yes. For me, I read an article a couple days ago about Jeff Kaplan. Some of you will recognize as one of the original leads in World of Warcraft, as that was in development 13 years ago. Currently, he's also a vice president still at Blizzard and leads the Overwatch game. and all of its development and planning and all of that. And he had an interview where he expressed that he was disappointed in the route that Blizzard took with Blitzchung. He felt like the punishment was too harsh and that it should still probably be eliminated altogether. He shared that when they're proposing banning a player in the Overwatch League, that it's a 4 or 5 day process, that there's a group of people, and that they argue all sides. Yes, no, everything in between, to make sure that they're making the fairest and most right decision. And he feels like this decision was really rushed and the right people weren't in the room to make that call. So the fact that there are even people, high up executives in Blizzard like Jeff, who can say that in an interview and not get backlash from the company encourages me. That just because a few people make what I think is a pretty egregious error, it doesn't mean the company as a whole is evil.
And I was going to say, I also commend the employees of Blizzard who did say, hey, we don't agree with this, knowing that maybe their jobs were on the line, but they felt that it was important enough to say it. And just, I don't know, I think it's cool when you see something, again, that's not happening, that's right, or you don't agree with, even in your company, to try to stand up and be like, we need to think about this again, leadership.
Yep. So with that out of the way, this is probably the heaviest thing we're going to talk about today. Let's talk about some of the
party.
The things that were announced. First of all, Diablo 4 was a big announcement. If you haven't seen the trailer, I don't necessarily recommend you watch it. It just depends on what your personal tolerance is. I wouldn't recommend watching it at work. The game's looks pretty dark. They even said they were going to focus on more darker imagery, even occultish things. So there's going to be like a personal decision everyone's going to have to make about whether they want to play a game that kind of dives into that stuff.
Yeah, some fans of the series are happy because it's harking back to the roots of Diablo 2.
Yeah.
Some of that dark stuff, occult stuff, I'm concerned about. And John had just a great idea about just even us doing a segment sometime, just talking about, hey, are there any guidelines about what Christians should and should not play? Spoiler alert, I think it varies. So I'm interested to get into that segment sometime. So
yeah.
Diablo, of the games that we're kind of talk about in this segment, is the one I'm least familiar with. I think the thing I know most about it is that quote that you say all the time about if you have wares.
Oh no, that's Skyrim. No, the one that you hear me say from.
But it has to do with like the shopkeeper or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's stay a while and listen.
Yes, that's it.
From Diablo 2. That wasn't the best impression I've ever done, but
that was pretty good.
It was okay. It was all right. But yeah, and the worst thing about Diablo 3 was that he dies in the opening cinematic, and I was like, what the heck?
Spoiler alert for a game 5 years ago.
For a game, yeah, that was longer than 5 years ago, I think, right? That was like, what, 2012?
No.
Gosh.
Fact checked. We have a special fact checker.
We do. When did Diablo 3 release?
Hello. Let me just check that up right now.
We'll get back to
the
you.
Disembodied voice.
But
from
yeah,
the nether.
I will say though that the fact that Diablo hasn't had a new game in a really long time is exciting for those that are.
Well, it was a huge gap between 2 and 3. That alone. So it's we'll see. We'll see. Like Derek said, a lot of people are excited that they're kind of reversing some of the things they did in Diablo 3. So
yes, Diablo 3 was originally released on Windows and iOS, not iOS, OS X on May 15th, 2012.
2012.
There you go. Nice stuff. You got it. So
that feels good.
So again, we'll dig into that maybe another segment because there's some concern, but also some fan excitement. So we'll talk about it.
So we'll see. But a game that I think most of us are at least looking forward to or seeing what they're going to do is Overwatch 2 was announced. Lucio. So Overwatch 2. The gameplay looks really interesting. There's a gameplay trailer for a new PvP mode called Push, and it's this big robot, and he's like, I am good at pushing things. And it's just like, you're adorable. I love this so much.
Aptly named. Good job, Blizzard.
Yeah. Very creative indeed. But yeah, so Overwatch 2 is going to have new characters, new maps, new play modes. They're adding a bunch of story content. There are arguments that maybe it should have been an expansion to Overwatch 1. But I do want to applaud Blizzard again for making a good decision that all of the skins, the emotes, everything that you've purchased in Overwatch 1 for all of those characters will be imported into Overwatch 2. So you're not you're not stuck with just the default skins when you start playing Overwatch 2, which I think is definitely a good call.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I never jumped on the Overwatch hype train. It seems like a lot of people really like it and really popular. I'm kind of excited about Overwatch 2 because it has PvE elements, and that's usually what I look for in games. So combining that with the PvP is pretty cool. So I'll be keeping an eye on it and see kind of what they do with it.
I would love to see if it's cross-platform. Like for example, Call of Duty just released Modern Warfare a few weeks ago, and that is cross-platform. People on the Xbox are in the same lobby as people on PC and PS4, and it's great to see more games going that way in the cross-platform route. So if Overwatch 2 was to do that, it would be great because like my brother has an Xbox. I play on PS4 and PC. He plays on PC as well, but it'd be nice to not have to coordinate which system we're buying a game for and just to be able to play.
Game companies, please keep doing that.
Cross-platform is one of the best things that's happened in the game
industry.
Such
a pain where you have a friend who has a whole different system. You're like, I guess we can't play that game together.
Right. Exactly.
I would say that Overwatch, I think, has a really fun feel to it. That's one of the things I really like about it. And I really like the story. I've really enjoyed all the cinematics that come out, not just the things for, trailers, but the little individual things they did for the characters and stuff. And I think that really, helps you get really into it, especially since a lot of people just meet up or create a group online and play, and it's sort of the same thing over and over again with the PvP aspect of it, but then you have the individual lore and the greater world lore. When you're talking about the potential for new maps, I don't think there is a map in France in the first game, right?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
But in the new trailer, the cinematic trailer, they are in France, and so I'm expecting there to be at least a map in France.
And there's a new character, Sojourn, that we don't really know too much about, but she's been in development for 4 years. I think 2015 is when they started developing her. Rumored that maybe they were working on her as early as 2014. First African American female character that's going to be playable in Overwatch. A lot of people are speculating she was named after Sojourner Truth, which I think there's probably at least a correlation. It's kind of hard to argue that there wouldn't be at that point. And it's also the first Canadian character that you can play. She's from Toronto, and there's a map that takes place in Toronto. So again, it's opening up to other areas, and I think those are good decisions.
And the characters have aged and grown, and it's not just like, we've moved forward in time, but the characters haven't because supernatural reasons. Is
that how companies do it?
I think, that was actually specifically what they said at BlizzCon. Supernatural reasons.
Quick correction.
Ooh.
Sorry. I was just looking this up. There is currently a Paris map in Overwatch 1, I believe.
Oh.
I see a video right here that says Paris now live.
Okay.
Cool. Maybe
But I think that might be a newer one, if I remember.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, the last game, and kind of the reason that we usually are talking about Blizzard, is of course World of Warcraft.
Wow.
Are
we going to do this every time, guys?
Every time we say
we do. And whenever I'm talking to my guild in WoW and I say the word WoW, I feel weird. Anyway, so Shadowlands was announced at BlizzCon 2019. A lot of things come with that announcement. Comes out next year. I think you're the most excited. I will say that it's the first expansion I have been excited for since Cataclysm. Cataclysm I was really excited for, and I enjoyed it, and then I eventually stopped enjoying it. Legion I liked. But I wouldn't say that when I saw the trailer, I was stoked to play. And Shadowlands, I'm actually I want to play this. Yeah, quite a bit. So why don't you tell me what some of your first thoughts were?
I'm hyped for it. First off, the trailer was Sylvanas. It looked like she was going to be a Lich Queen.
Right.
She went a whole different path. So that was kind of crazy. I watched a couple people reaction videos, and all of them like, what is she doing? So it's cool when Blizzard can pull in a little twist like that. It had been data mined, and there were leaks and stuff like that. So we sort of knew a few of the story beats, but that was a big twist I don't think a lot of people were looking at. So as far as the theme, I'm cool with that. I'm excited about the leveling squish. So they're taking 120 levels. They're going to bring it down if you have a 120 character now, you'll have a 50 level character when Shadowlands release, and then you'll level from 50 to 60. Well, I'm super excited as an altaholic, as someone who like just plays alts all the time, is that you can there's now a new starting zone for alts, so you can level from 1 to 10, and then from 10 to 50, you can pick which expansion you want to go through. So there's expansions that I haven't ever finished. Wrath of the Lich King, don't yell at me.
It was so good. Oh,
there goes all my WoW Street cred.
Vanilla, Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, all three, in my opinion, are fantastic.
So the good thing is you can now take an alt, level them 10, and go straight there. You don't have to level 80. I think it's like you have to get to 60 or 70 wherever before you go to there. Anyways, so I'm excited what they're doing with the alts and class progression. They are focusing less on specs and more on making the class as a whole feel unique. And you can still spec into different things, but that's not going to alter your class as much as specs do now. So I'm excited what they're doing for alts and classes. A bunch of other stuff. What are you guys excited about?
I agree. The idea of getting classes back to a place where they all feel unique is great. I mean, sure, a warrior is melee, a rogue is melee, a mage is a spell casting ranged class. So from that perspective, they're unique. But the way that it is now, any of those classes can solo their way to level cap if they want to. They all have the ability to make sure that they stay, healed up and everything, and they're all survivable. Whereas, the main tank in our guild in Classic, like, he got to level 60, got some of his gear, and now he leaves that character parked in front of the raid instance because they're not fun to solo. Mm-hmm. Warriors suck in vanilla. They're just not good solo classes. You pull one mob and you're okay. You pull two, this is how I die.
That is the theme with WoW Classic, by the way.
And then as a mage, you've got Frost Nova, so you can freeze two guys, polymorph a third, burst the second one down before the other one even is unfrozen. Then you can kill him, and then you can, like, by the time the polymorph wears off, you've got Frost Nova again. You can kill 3 people like nothing, or more. Like, there's all this stuff, right? And so every class feels unique in Classic, which is one of the things I love. So them going back to that, I think, is a very good decision. It's a very good call. And then even on top of that, like you said, the level squish, bringing it back down to 60. One, it's less intimidating than, I have to get to a level 120.
Yeah.
And two, 5 years from now, I cringe to think that the level cap would be something ridiculous like 160. Like, that just sounds dumb.
I'm going to level to 200 right now on the weekend. Yeah.
Right? It doesn't sound, I don't know. Something about it just seems ridiculous having that high of a level
Isn't
cap.
it that the people who are currently at 120 are going to end up having to level again? Like, not completely, but they
so
come
they'll
back
get
down to 50.
Yeah, and in vanilla WoW, the same amount of experience points required to get from level 1 to level 50, that amount, whatever it is, say it's 1 million, that exact same amount to get from 50 to 60, right? So by the time you get to level 50, you're like halfway, even though you only have 10 more levels to go. So I have a feeling they're going to do something similar when they do the level squish.
Yeah, they said they are speeding up leveling, and also every level is going to come with some type of benefit. And so it might be a talent, it might be an extra spell or whatever. So their goal is to make every level feel important. And so that's one of the reasons they're doing the squish, which I'm all behind. I think it's cool.
A great
and
call.
You brought up a good point. Anyone who's just starting WoW, I have to get to 120 unless you have a character boost, and then you don't really know your character. That's a whole nother situation. But like, it's intimidating for someone who's just starting out playing. And so to be able to go in and be like, I can do this, not too bad. I think it's a good idea.
Well, in Jalen Brack, he said that the decisions they were making for Shadowlands, the decisions that we're praising, that I think that the majority of gamers are really enjoying, are a result of feedback. One, I think Classic WoW has blown away their projections for popularity, and so they're trying to find ways to kind of make Shadowlands feel a little bit more like old school WoW, which I think they're doing a great job with. But it was a result of feedback and realizing that maybe they had made some decisions along the way that, even though they seemed right at the time, weren't necessarily the best. And they are willing to change. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the most important thing, is when you've been going a certain way, even if you think that it's the right way, when more information comes to you and you realize, hey, maybe this wasn't right, maybe I should, course correct, being willing to course correct is an important and valuable quality in an individual, and even more so in a company. And so personal responsibility matters. Our ability to say, hey, you know what? This wasn't the best call, and I'm gonna change it. And they displayed a little bit of that with the Blitzchung thing, at least a little bit, when they gave Miss Prize money back and lowered the sentence from a 12-month ban to a 6-month ban. Even though maybe we're not all happy with even a 6-month ban, they did something. Mm-hmm. They've course corrected a little bit. In his apology, they took a little bit of personal responsibility. It may not be everything we want, but it's a step in the right direction.
I'm interested to see how much of this course correcting that they're doing is going to affect people who went to vanilla. Maybe they went to vanilla because they didn't like the way their retail was going or the decisions that were made in retail. Now, a lot of people went to vanilla because they like the nostalgia factor of it. Mm-hmm. But for those that did go because they were tired of retail and the direction it was going, I'm curious to see if this new expansion is going to get them happy about retail again and have them return to retail.
As someone who only plays Classic, I really want to play Shadowlands.
Yeah. And it's because of Blizzard's actions. And exactly. To your point, because they took feedback, took responsibility, and are now changing. So I think that gets to our faith point, just about taking responsibility. There's this great verse in the Bible, Galatians 6:45. It's a great passage about not comparing ourselves to other people, focusing on doing our job well. Then we have a just satisfaction of just doing a great job. But it goes and it ends with, because we should each be responsible for our own conduct. Yeah. And I love that. I had a friend who, we were going through a difficult time, was blaming me for everything. And I'm the type of person that can kind of take on a lot of extra responsibility, so I was feeling really bad. And I really think God brought this passage to my, notice. So it kind of made it almost in a way saving my life. I ended up writing this article to talk about the freedom of responsibility. Because you think about that, there's a lot of freedom and responsibility. If someone's treating you bad, and you're like, you know what, the stuff that they have done is on them. That's between them and God. I'm going to leave it there. There's freedom. I'm not responsible for their junk. But if there's a relationship or something, and I'm doing something bad where it's 20%, 30%, whatever it is, I'm going to take responsibility of that stuff, because that stuff is stuff that I want to change. And I can bring that to God, and I know He can help me change that. So that won't affect my future relationships. That won't affect my future friendships, things like that. And so there's freedom in saying, hey, I'm responsible for this part of this. Let me take care of that. I think so often in our world, we don't like to feel guilt. We don't like to feel shame. So we have a bunch of different responses to it. We'll run away from it. We'll blame someone else for it. We'll ignore it. And I think one of the reasons Jesus died for us is not just so we can be clean of sin, but we can also be clean of guilt and shame. You know, and that only happens when we bring it to God, when we take responsibility for our junk, be like, God, I did this. I messed up. I need your help. Mm-hmm. And God comes and says, I got you. But that only happens when you're willing to take responsibility. So what do you guys think about that idea?
What comes to mind when I think about someone who admits their wrongdoings is, I saw this quote actually on Twitter that really resonated with me. It was, "You are not a hypocrite if you change your mind after receiving new information." And I think that's what a lot of people are scared of. Like, if they spend their whole life saying there is no God, or God hates us, or those kinds of worldviews, and then they have a radical encounter with Christ and decide to follow Him, the fear of being called a hypocrite, the fear of admitting that you were wrong, can sometimes hold people back from making that life-altering decision.
Kind of like going around in media and interviews and saying, I am God, and then eventually releasing an album called Jesus is King. Hashtag Kanye West.
They're going to work it in somehow.
I had to say something because, yeah, of course.
Praying for you, Kanye.
But yeah, personal responsibility. It's important, right? What's one of the most, I work in HR, one of the most important qualities that an employee can have is teachability. And what makes someone teachable? They can receive feedback, they can incorporate that feedback, and they can accept it. And usually that feedback is in the form of constructive criticism, like, hey, you're doing it this way. That's not that it's bad, but there's a better way, and when someone makes a mistake, being able to just own up to it, like, hey, here's where I dropped the ball. I love nothing more than when someone can come to me and we're talking about something and they'll be like, da 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 da, and here's where I dropped the ball and here's what we can do to correct it. Like, because they don't have to have a conversation about it, because they recognize that they dropped the ball. They recognize there was a mistake, and then we can move on. But it's when someone doesn't want to admit that there's a mistake, whether it's pride or fear of punishment or whatever it is that's driving that lack of personal responsibility. That's when you realize, okay, well, if they can't admit their faults, then they're not teachable, and if they're not teachable, then eventually they're going to no longer have a job. And that is much more outside of just the job world, but relationships as well. If I'm never taking personal responsibility for my faults and my failures, and I'm putting all of that on my spouse, it's going to drive a wedge between us. There's going to be bitterness. There's going to be just a lot of pain and hurt and wounding that never gets healed. And I think one of the things that's so wonderful about the gospel is that we have personal responsibility for all of the mistakes we have made, but the payment to fix them isn't required from us. All we have to do is believe in Christ, to love him, and he takes care of the payment, right? The Bible says that all have sinned, right? And the wages of sin is death. But we don't have to pay that. That's why Jesus came. He was the payment for us. And so there isn't any fear in Christ of accepting personal responsibility for our failures, because we have been saved from eternity in hell. Not because we're great and we're righteous and we're holy and all of these wonderful things about ourselves, but because of what he did. And so we don't have to be afraid of admitting when we've screwed up. We can do that openly with God. God invites us to tell him. The Bible commands us to even confess to one another because it encourages each other, because no one's perfect. And one of the greatest problems that happens in the church is people elevate the pastor, put him on this huge pedestal, and pastors are just humans too. People who preach the word of God, they're just people. They're as broken as the rest of us. And when we elevate them to this really high standard and then they make a mistake, it can hurt our faith. But then was our faith in them or was our faith in Jesus? And so the only person we need to put on a pedestal is Christ. And once we recognize that, and we recognize that everyone is as broken as I am, it frees me to admit my faults, because I know that it's not the judgment of man that I need to be concerned with, because we're all broken. We've all made mistakes, and we can just be real with each other and accept one another and push each other on to be better together. Sorry.
And it's amazing how a simple apology or a simple "I'm sorry" changes the whole conversation. Bring it back around to Blizzard. Again, I'm excited that they started their convention off with the apology, because I think it diffuses the situation a little bit. Not everyone's happy. It's not going to be solved overnight. Blizzard's a company. They're going to make mistakes. But I think just like, hey, we acted too quickly for the situation. I think, okay, they're starting to hear. We'll see how they handle that. I think with the World of Warcraft, hey, we're hearing our fan feedback. They're not liking how the game's going. We're going to shift some things, to more important stuff in relationships, just a simple, hey, I realized I did this wrong. I'm sorry. Like, diffuses the whole situation. So I would encourage people, be humble, be willing to admit when you make a mistake. And again, give that guilt, that shame over to God, because he wants to take that away from us.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Derek and Hannah, for your thoughts. I think the biggest takeaway today is forgive easily and apologize easily. When we hold on to that stuff, it's not good for anybody. So have a good week. God loves you. We love you. Peace out. Hey, Derek, you played Overwatch, right?
I have not. Don't go for me with that.
Neither of you.
Today.
All right, Hannah, just say yes, okay? They don't have to know. Okay, trying that one again.